It's a dangerous business,
Frodo, going out your door, you step onto the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you might be swept off to.
The progression system in Pantheon has been one of my most anticipated topics to do more research on and dive into with the rest of you. Progression is such an important factor in MMOs that it needs to be prioritized as highly, if not more so, than the available content players gain access to. Pantheon Rise of the Fallen is aiming to move away from the traditional modern-day formula of vertical progression and take it back to a time where games in this genre offered a more dynamic and horizontal experience for this system. Before we dive into what we can expect from Pantheon, we should first talk about the differences between both vertical and horizontal progression so we can fully understand what we're talking about. So vertical progression is an experience you might see in many games of the current decade, like World of Warcraft in its current state. This system has you focus mainly on gear, as this is the primary in-game marker of progression in the bulk of theme park MMOs. You level up a character, run the current content, gaining new tiers of gear for your efforts, and when the next expansion arrives you do it all again for the next tier, so on and so forth. Vertical progression places an emphasis in strengthening the equipment at your disposal rather than applying the equipment differently or using alternative gear or abilities to succeed at various scenarios. Now there are some advantages to this formula. It helps to make MMOs more accessible, reduce the steepness and learning curve, and allow for developers to focus their time on key in-game content without alienating the player base. However, there's also some cons. One thing is that on this progression path, there's not many ways to keep old content fresh, and in future updates, the older areas can quickly become circumvented with catch-up mechanics that get implemented by the developers. Kinda like how before the Shadowlands expansion came out, there wasn't a whole lot of reason aside from farming transmog to come back to earlier expansion areas once you've progressed or skipped past them. But on the other hand, you have horizontal progression. Maybe you're looking for more freedom in your game, you want to spend more time theory crafting or potentially min-maxing to develop the most viable path to progress your character. Horizontal mechanics are normally equated with sandbox MMOs like Mortal Online, or, from what I've heard about it, even a game such as Final Fantasy XI might offer what most consider to be a horizontal experience. Horizontal progression is the idea that makes you think outside the confines of linear progression. The games under this branch will often give elements that actively cater to individual strategy building, rather than simply equipping characters to face the latest content the MMO world can offer. Horizontal mechanics point towards the development of a wide range of character attributes, but also give way to skill development, alternative types of gear like something that might give you fire or poison resistance. The difference between an ice staff and a fire staff can also completely change the abilities you gain access to, and even pieces of equipment that have the exact same stats at endgame but have different attributes or bonuses they provide. And as far as the content goes, you normally have a wide array of options, sometimes so much so that it can feel slightly overwhelming and you may not feel like you know where to start. Some of the benefits of horizontal progression include that in contrast to vertical, old content rarely becomes irrelevant and you'll normally have more options to play with friends instead of forcing your friends to catch up to you. Also, you could viably become comfortable with a certain set of gear or weapons, making it so you can perfect your style and not have to worry about changing things up every time a new piece of gear comes out that has better stats but different effects attached. But there could also be cons. Sometimes fading interest is something that comes with horizontal systems where you can often feel as if your efforts aren't shown through physical reward, therefore you might lose interest in doing certain types of content. Normally in a vertical system, you would finish a set of content so that you can access the next tier above. But in horizontal systems, these tiers would become doors of sorts in which you can pick what you walk into at any given time. Sometimes this can end in a situation where you default to doing content that appears the most interesting, while not really having a care about the rest of the choices. Visionary Realms aims to take a more horizontal approach, while seemingly having a few elements of verticality. They've made it a recurring topic to discuss how low-level areas will not just offer your traditional experience. Some of or all of these areas will also have high-level areas either connected or embedded within them. And then of course you also have to take the perception system into account. You could farm through a dungeon over 80 times and not notice a secret passage or treasure room that only a keeper can identify for you. Or if you're in an area farming on mobs, you may not notice a shortcut that can be taken on a farming route or a secret cavern that may lead to the true boss of the area. Recently during a live stream with Carnage, the team mentioned how even at endgame you will still find yourself discovering many things in areas you have either already been to or never seen before. You might notice that tiny ring at the bottom of a lake in a starter zone that ends up being the best in slot, areas that you can't access due to acclimation or something powerful that once stood in your way but no longer. There's also other aspects to add on to this. You've got exploration at night and how it differs from during the day, traveling underwater and being able to increase your swimming or breathing skills, gaining access to gear that helps you fight against the currents or sink deeper, different climates that work against you both above land and below, and being able to conquer all of that in order to reach new areas with new treasure to be had. The exact wording they've used to describe the underwater in the past is murky, expansive abyss. Pantheon doesn't seem to be going for an experience where it lays everything out for you right away and you follow the path from start to finish. This game wants you to explore and see what lies off the beaten path, and developers have already confirmed how they aren't afraid to make things easy to overlook. Although one thing I do hope they make a lot of use of is dynamic events. I love the concept of having a different experience at night than in the daytime and having these spawn based on the time of day or what region you're in. Potentially even which dynamic events were completed beforehand. Sounds extremely amazing to me. I haven't had a chance to specifically look into what their plans are for that sort of thing, but I do remember them mentioning the idea of having crafted associated with dynamic events, so I can imagine they might be heading in this direction. Now we know that Pantheon will feature quest lines, mob grinding, dungeons, and might even offer dynamic events when it comes to the leveling system. You have your character's level that makes up a portion of your power, but you also have weapon techniques, your core class abilities, and attributes. Also in the future, they're thinking of developing ways of passive experience gain, such as discovering new areas, but right now there's nothing particularly set in stone. Weapon techniques is something we've covered a bit before, but the baseline gist is that when you equip these various weapons we'll have access to, the choice you make and how trained you are in that weapon will affect which abilities you gain access to. So as a wizard, having a dagger or even a fire or ice staff could present you with completely different abilities. Currently they're considering additional ways to train our weapon skills that tie into our techniques. Of course, combat will probably always be the primary way, but in the future we may see NPC trainers or even training partners that we can find in the cities or out in the worlds. In combination to this, we will also be gaining core class abilities as we level, just like we would in a traditional MMO. When you're playing at the early levels, you'll find yourself being given decent abilities to use that you wouldn't normally expect very early on. It's intentional for the player to notice themselves being more active, especially for non-casters. There's this kind of balance they want to strike between slowing down the overall actions per minute in the pursuit of that overall tactical gameplay, but still give players that sense of agency and things we can do while waiting for these resources to build. Pantheon will also be utilizing a faction system that's already fully functional and being expanded in preparation of Alpha 1. This is another feature that'll fit into the progression system and allow us to gain experience in the form of reputation. They've talked briefly here and there about the types of rewards we could get from gaining reputation from these factions. We might get access to new quest lines, faction vendors, crafting related rewards, etc. It's also been confirmed that we as players can declare war on these factions. I'm unsure if we'll be able to declare peace or if it'll have an entire reward structure of its own, but it's clear that they want to give us multiple avenues of choice, whether it's leveling, progressing our reputation, or even strengthening our crafting and gathering skills. They luckily don't have any plans for weeklies or dailies, unless it ties into respawns or dungeon/raid lockouts that makes sense to have a balance for. Crafting and gathering will not be required to progress in the game. In fact, you could spend your whole time adventuring without ever touching a trade skill, just like you could primarily craft and gather without ever having to worry about adventuring. Of course, at certain points, one path might need assistance from the other, and you can ask for that, but either direction will never be required. They want to make sure that whether you're starting fresh, solo leveling, or have a group of friends, there's going to be options for you, and instead of feeling compelled to catch up as soon as you can take your time and really get immersed in the world and gain rewards for doing so. As far as specific features like battlegrounds, hell gates from Albion, guild content, or any type of feature that you could do specifically to progress through levels and bypass the traditional questing, I haven't really seen a lot of discussion on it yet, and of course they're probably going to first focus more on the PvE side. However, guild functionality will be enabled for Alpha 1. They don't plan to do housing or guild halls at the moment and have a very specific reason for why. They want to make sure that these aren't areas you can just hibernate in to cut yourself off in the rest of the game world. They want there to be synergy there where there's both the reason for it to be in the world and also to be more detailed than instance housing we'd normally see in MMOs. When I heard them talk about this, all that came to mind for me was Arcade. So I'm expecting something similar in the future where maybe we'd be able to buy and build our house plots in the world and might even see guild halls pop up at the same time. But the biggest thing I want to reiterate on for progression is that they want to create a world that truly opens itself up to you the more you play and invest your time. Part of their itemization paradigm is that they're not big on item level or incremental linear progression. The way they talk about it internally is that you've got your normal items and you've got your magical items. And sometimes you can get a really good magical item, even at a lower level, that might last you 10, 20, even 30 levels, or even still be viable at max level because that's just the nature of these magical items. And it's not just you get this amount of stats at this level or not, it's if you're fortunate enough to find one of those things, you can use it for however long because it's just that good. There will be plenty of scenarios and opportunities like this across the world of Pantheon, and I feel like it's what best describes the experience we'll be seeing. Not just your items, but your attributes, the skills themselves, weapon levels, and more will synergize to make up what your character becomes. Hopefully this gives you a good idea of what to encounter, but if anything else, the progression system of Pantheon can be described in one simple word: freedom. That'll be all for now, folks. Thanks so much for watching and have a great night or day. Farewell.
Just